The burning frustration of the Palestinians. The Arab League calls for an international criminal investigation into Israeli killings in Gaza. And leaders of the Muslim world meet in Turkey. But Palestinians don't think enough is being done to end their plight. Are they right? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Their aim is to send a message of solidarity to the Palestinian people and to focus on their plight. Leaders of the Muslim world met in Turkey for an extraordinary summit of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. The meeting in Istanbul coincided with the Arab League calling for an international criminal investigation into the killing of dozens of Palestinians in Gaza by Israeli soldiers. OIC representatives from more than 50 Muslim-majority nations were at the Turkey summit. Despite the sense of unity, many Palestinians don't fully embrace the support. Their levels of frustration have risen yet again, believing Arab leaders are not doing enough to confront Israel and the United States. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, Hashim Ahilbara reports.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shaped Arab politics for decades. The defeat of Arab armies in 1948 was a defining moment. Gamal Abdel Nasser came to power in Egypt, stating his goal was to liberate Palestine. Although the message from the second president of Egypt galvanized people in the region, Arab armies suffered another setback in 1967.
Arabs didn't do us any good. They're standing by the Israelis. Did they do anything for us? Nothing. We are here. Some die, some live, some go to jails.
Halima Nakhli, a refugee who was expelled from her village 70 years ago, is one of many Palestinians who say Arab countries abandoned them. As Egyptian regional influence started to wane following its defeat in the 1967 war, Jordan stepped in. Palestinians doubt the kingdom will be able to challenge a recent American push to broker a new peace deal. They fear the deal may exclude refugees from the right of return to their ancestral land and dash hopes of making occupied East Jerusalem the capital of the future Palestinian state.
What's the deal of the century? It's all about buying us with money. Now Jordan is almost on board. Same with Egypt. Only Palestinians rejected it, and they are pressuring us to agree to the deal.
As Egyptian and Jordanian influence in the region shrank, Saudi Arabia took over, tapping into vast oil wealth. The kingdom has become a major influence in the Middle East. In 2002, the Saudis offered Arab recognition of Israel in exchange for full withdrawal from occupied territories and East Jerusalem.
It's not the priority, it's their own regime's existence, be it the monarchy in Saudi Arabia or the Sisi government, and they're willing to make compromises and deals to ensure their longevity.
In Gaza, Israeli snipers have killed unarmed Palestinians protesting at their imprisonment in the strip sealed off from Egypt and Israel. Palestinians blame the world for largely turning its back on their plight. Palestinians have lost hope Arab leaders will ever stand up against the US administration and Israel. They're also concerned divisions and instability in the region undermine their chances to establish a Palestinian state and ensure refugees return home. Hashim Ahilbara, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Let's bring in our guests. In Doha with me is Ibrahim Fraihat, Associate Professor in International Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. In Istanbul is Ahmed al-Burai, a columnist and political commentator on the Middle East. And in Washington, D.C., via Skype is Khalil Jahshan, Executive Director of the Arab Center of Washington and a Middle East analyst. Now, Ibrahim, I want to start with you. More and more Palestinians have been expressing their frustration with Arab leadership when it comes to voicing support for the Palestinian cause. I guess the question is, did it take more than 60 people being killed in one day in Gaza for Arab leaders to find their voice?
Well, actually, it did not start with the 60 people that were killed in Gaza. It started before with the Trump announcement of Jerusalem as capital of Israel and moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So the Arab reaction to that was below expectations and was extremely disappointing for the Palestinians and for the entire region. And for that reason, I think why we are seeing the Palestinians taking things in their own hands, because they are more and more realizing if they do not defend Palestine, if they do not defend Jerusalem, then Arab rulers are not going to do so. Right after the announcement of Donald Trump to move Jerusalem as capital of Israel, there was a call for an urgent Arab summit to be held and for the Arabs to take a position. But unfortunately, a country like Saudi Arabia refused to do so and refused to have that urgent summit. I think Arab rulers today are mostly careful or mostly aware only about their own regime survival. Palestine is no longer a priority for them. The political equation in the region has changed. They want to see Iran being placed as the major or the source of a threat for their own regimes. And for that reason, they want to replace Palestine, as has always been the central issue for the Arabs in the region, to place it on Iran and to divert the whole attention to Iran. And that's why we're not seeing enough attention from Arab regimes responding to the development in Palestine.
Khalil, from your perspective, how much of this can be attributed directly to the extremely close ties between U.S. President Donald Trump and the government of Saudi Arabia?
I'm not sure it's Donald Trump personally, as much as the apparent kind of conceiving by these regimes of the fact that the survival of the regimes, their raison d'etre, depends on their bilateral relation with the United States as a country. I think that's what contributes to all these factors that my colleague Ibrahim just accurately described, whether it's the survival of the regime or basically the way they perceive threats as coming at them from the region, from particularly Iran at this time, and their kind of conception that they only conceive that the U.S. is the only country that can help him with that. So that, I think, is playing a key role in terms of that. The wave of condemnation we have seen that Ibrahim referred to is not only deficient in terms of the volume, but also in terms of the content. We are not seeing any serious degree of intensity and of focus with regards to all these statements, whether we heard them from individual countries, leading countries in the region, or from the Arab League or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So the Palestinians find themselves today as, on the one hand, victimized by the Israeli brutality, on the other hand, totally ignored, inundated with the statements of sympathy, but nothing practical at all to end their misery.
Ahmed, Khalil just mentioned the Arab League and the OIC. Of course, the Arab League met on Thursday. They condemned what happened in Gaza. They condemned the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Of course, the OIC has met in Turkey. Can we expect much to happen after these meetings took place?
To say the least, the Arabs are complicit in what's happening in Jerusalem, in Gaza. They are on the same board with the Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. It's, again, the new dynamics of the Middle East. It's the headache that has been caused by the Palestinian cause to the Arab world and especially the Gulf countries. Now they think it's time to get rid of this headache once and for all. And, like now we are talking about the new absurdity of this era, which is a coalition, a Sunni coalition, including Israel, to fight the hegemony or the over-expansionist policies of Iran in the region, disregarding or the withdrawal of the United States States from the nuclear deal is still very relevant to what we're talking about. Now the Palestinians are by themselves. They do not trust anybody. As Halima, the one in the report you've started with the program, she said we're dying and none of the Arabs have helped us. Here in Turkey, President Tayyip Erdogan is trying to at least give them some hope because he sees what's going on with everybody, the international community in action. They're unable just to condemn what's going on. It's a pure massacre, and the international media is still speaking about clashes and violence between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It was civilians who were killed by the Israelis. It's a massacre, no more than this. And you know the irony, the irony we're living in is the Arab word is not saying any word, the formal Arab word, even the popular as well.
Ibrahim, how concerned must countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan be about the prospect of these protests in Gaza continuing?
Well, I think there is a very important point here to be made, which is if this continues, actually this is going to put these regimes in confrontation with their own people. And this is, I think, what most of these regimes fear the most, their own people. Because as my colleagues also said, there is a coalition is being formed, very absurd coalition of a Sunni with Israel, with Donald Trump, trying to reshape the politics of the region with no support on the ground, on the public level, to such weird coalitions that are being made. These coalitions are made by individuals, by individual rulers, that they are entering into this kind of arrangements, thinking that they can easily reshape the politics of the region. This is not going to happen. Palestine has always been central for the entire past century, for the entire Arab region. Yes, there are important things that come up, that came up over the past century, but always Palestine went back and made headlines. Palestine is in the hearts and minds of the public, of the people. So if these in the region, so if these clashes or if these protests or these massacres continue, I think this is going to add a tremendous pressures on those regimes, to do something, because you cannot, or the public cannot reconcile to have Palestinians are being slaughtered by these massacres in Palestine, while at the same time seeing their rulers are being in bed with the Israeli government, with Netanyahu and with others. It's so difficult, and this is going to lead, to a confrontation, between the two sides. And for that reason, I think the Arab rulers will try to bring an end to this and try to stop it before it continues. And let's not forget that the entire region is surviving, a huge, sharp polarization between different countries, and the absence, unfortunately, of some major Central Arab countries have led to the situation where we are now at the moment.
Khalil, you heard Ibrahim just now speaking about alliances that are being made between some Arab leaders and Israel, that their strategic interests are being more and more aligned. Now, I was in Ramallah in early April when these comments by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman came out, in which he said that Israel has a right to a homeland. That really sent shockwaves through a lot of the Palestinian communities, people that I was speaking with in Ramallah. Of course, it was just a couple of days later that Saudi King Salman seemed to kind of walk back those comments. He said, of course, that the Saudis stood steadfastly behind the Palestinians and their desire for a Palestinian state capital in East Jerusalem. So I want to ask you, just how shocking were those comments? And I want to ask you about what you believe is happening right now between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
These statements that you refer to and you witnessed the reaction personally have been very shocking, actually, to the Palestinians. And they are not just to the Palestinians, they are actually shocking to even some of the population of Saudi Arabia itself. It's very important, I think, to explain a little bit what Ibrahim just referred to in terms of the contradiction between official Arab perspectives, the official positions of these governments, and the gap that separates that from public opinion. The Arab Opinion Index conducted by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha, our colleagues in in Doha was just completed for this past year. And when you see public opinion considering the issue of Palestine as their number one cause, their number one issue, reaching in some countries 90th percentile support, in some countries maybe 80, in some countries 70, but at least 2/3 of Arab public opinion throughout the Arab world still perceives the Palestine question as their number one cause, their number one issue. And that is not reflected in the statements we have seen or in the policies we have witnessed most recently with regards to Palestine. Now, it behooves countries like Saudi Arabia to explain that gap between the statements made by the Crown Prince and the statement made by his dad, on the other hand, and the statement just actually approved by the cabinet this week. 2 days ago, the Saudi cabinet meeting in Riyadh was very, very unequivocal in terms of its support for the Palestinian cause. And its foreign minister just yesterday, Adel Jubeir, reiterated the fact that the Palestine question is the number one issue for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yet that is not reflected in its relationship either with the United States, condemning the moving of the embassy, condemning the change of U.S. policy vis-a-vis Jerusalem, condemning the level of violence that the Israelis are using, and supported and justified by the United States, by this administration, is not enough. Condemnation is no longer valid, convincing, or credible, not on the political level, and definitely not on the moral level. So it behooves these countries, not just Saudi Arabia. I don't want to single just Saudi Arabia, all Arab countries for that matter, and all Muslim countries, because frankly, they have, all of them collectively, they have not risen to the level of the seriousness of this crisis. And this is going to come back and haunt them in the near future if they do not adjust to that. With regards to your earlier question, definitely there is an attempt for a new version of rapprochement with this current administration, the Trump administration, and finding basically a common ingredient in enmity toward Iran. That's fine. I fully understand the concerns that some of these countries have vis-a-vis Iran and Iranian interventions in the region, but that doesn't justify marginalizing the Palestine issue, the number one issue of the Arab people throughout the Arab world.
Ahmed, I want to ask you about some reports that have emerged in the past few days that a senior member of Hamas's political bureau said during a TV interview this week that 50 of the 62 people killed by Israeli soldiers during clashes in Gaza on Monday were members of Hamas. Now, there's been some controversy about these remarks. Some other members of Hamas have spoken to the media and said that these remarks were misconstrued. Others have said that these kind of remarks, really only help Israel to justify their actions. Where does this take the argument at this stage?
Well, the argument is very fair. Everybody watching the Palestinian, what's happening in Gaza in particular, knows that these people were civilians and they've took to the streets just to return, just to protest against the siege that has been imposed for more than 11 years now. They're not asking for too much. They're asking for the right to return to the land that they have been forcibly evicted from and displaced from 70 years ago. It's a peaceful protest. None of the Israelis have been harmed, and they did not pose any kind of threat to the Israeli soldiers. But still, the Israelis, the snipers, they were shooting them deliberately, and after that, joining on the camera and posting this on social media. The ambassador here in Turkey was asked in a program here in Istanbul, what will you do? Why did they do that? And he said an investigation will be opened and we will see the result. But none of these investigations have been opened, and we didn't hear from him. He was expelled from Turkey. So it's a vicious circle that the Israeli occupation is trying to show that the civilians, even Lieberman, you just think about it. Come on. Think of Lieberman, the defense minister of the Israeli occupation, is saying that there are no victims there are no innocent people in Gaza. That's what he said. Back to the politics of it, Netanyahu is saying no state solution. solution. Jerusalem is not on the table. So you're pushing the Palestinians to be more desperate, looking for any kind of solution. And that's what they're doing, defending their land and rights, but they're, naked or their bare hands.
All right, Ibrahim, look, we talked a lot about Palestinian anger toward Arab leadership. But what about Palestinian anger toward Palestinian leadership? When I was in Gaza in 2016, when I was speaking to ordinary Palestinians in Gaza, they were talking about how angry they were with Palestinian leadership. Whenever I've been to Ramallah, I hear much the same. People disenchanted and not trusting their leadership. Where does Palestinian leadership stand in all of this right now?
Well, thank you very much, because this is really important that we do not put all the blame on the Arab leaders, despite all what they're doing of ignoring the whole issue. But also the Palestinian leadership bears a major responsibility for this. Unfortunately, the Palestinian division between Fatah and Hamas has seriously harmed the Palestinian cause. And actually, it gave kind of an excuse for Arab leaders to say that, look, the Palestinians themselves are divided, so when they end their division, then we probably can do something. There is absolutely no justification for the Palestinian leadership is to have this division that harmed, the Palestinian cause, and where the Palestinian people stand strongly against it for the past 10 years. And not only this, it's not only about the Fatah-Hamas decision, it's about the absence of a serious Palestinian strategy of how to move forward in dealing or in responding to the aggressive Netanyahu government policies toward Palestine. There is no Palestinian strategy, unfortunately. Abbas' only strategy is negotiate forever. And this works perfectly with the Israeli strategy of just keep negotiating forever until we change facts on the ground in Jerusalem, in settlements, and all of that, while there is no Palestinian strategy clear. So the absence, Palestinians have to take the leadership, and then the Arab leaders or the Arab countries should support. But in the absence of a serious Palestinian strategy and the absence of a serious Palestinian project to lead and to propose and to show the way forward and how to respond to the Israeli government policies, I think the Arabs will take advantage of that, the Arab leaders. And that's why we are not seeing serious pressure on that level, on the Arab leaders. When we remember how the situation was during Yasser Arafat, when Yasser Arafat had a vision, had a project, we saw a whole different reaction from Arab leaders. But we lack this charisma of Arafat today and the strategy and the vision in order to lead the way forward and to put the pressure on Arab leaders to follow.
Khalid, we don't have too much time left, but before we run out of time, I want to ask you to build a little bit on what Ibrahim was saying there, specifically when it comes to Hamas. What kind of pressure specifically is Hamas under at the moment?
Tremendous pressure. I think Hamas is facing an existential crisis today, and its future, politically at least, is at stake. Look, let me be very blunt. I mean, time is limited, but let me say this. There are 4 parties that are guilty to producing the inhumane conditions in Gaza today. Definitely Israel for laying siege since 2006 to the Strip and causing this humanitarian crisis, whereby international organizations, including the UN, declared the Strip uninhabitable in a year or two. That cannot be forgiven. Second, of course, one cannot deny the fact that the Palestinians have something to do with this, and the Egyptians also. The Egyptians just announced that for Ramadan, they are opening basically the passage between Gaza and Egypt. Why should that be closed to start with? I mean, is this like a special Ramadan practice that for 20, 30 days we open up the Rafah passage and the rest of the year we punish Gazans? And third, the Palestinians themselves, whether the PA in Ramallah or Hamas has failed to govern and to change the situation. They were in control totally within the Gaza Strip, and they have failed to do that. And Fatah in Ramallah, the PA, has totally also failed. And as a matter of fact, we're contributing to the siege of Gaza by punishing, if you will, the population of Gaza that's demonstrating now at the border with Israel, condemning this inhumane situation they find themselves in. Mm-hmm. So there is plenty of blame to spread across the divide here to cover all these parties, speaking frankly.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thanks to our guests, Ibrahim Fraihat, Ahmed Al-Burai, and Khalil Jahshan. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.